The sun hung low over the savanna, casting long shadows across the dried grass, when Kofi first heard the screaming. It was high-pitched, desperate, the unmistakable cry of an elephant calf in mortal danger. He killed the engine immediately, letting the jeep roll to a silent stop, and grabbed his binoculars. Through the wavering heat shimmer, the scene materialized like something out of a nightmare. 6 hyenas had formed a perfect circle around the baby elephant in the middle of an open clearing. The calf was impossibly small, no more than 3 months old, his skin still wrinkled and soft. He spun in place like a trapped animal, his trunk raised high, screaming for his mother with a sound that tore through the afternoon air, but she was nowhere in sight. The clearing stretched empty in all directions, nothing but bare earth and scattered tufts of grass. Kofi's jaw tightened. A mother elephant never abandons her young. Never. Something had gone terribly wrong. The alpha male moved first, a scarred, battle-worn creature with a torn left ear that hung at an awkward angle. He feinted forward with practiced precision, his jaws snapping shut inches from the calf's trembling legs. The little elephant jumped backward in pure panic and crashed directly into another hyena that had been circling behind him. Before the calf could react, the predator clamped its teeth onto his tail with savage efficiency. The calf's scream changed pitch, no longer just fear, but pain. Kofi didn't hesitate. His foot slammed down on the gas pedal. The jeep lunged forward through the bushes like a charging rhinoceros, branches snapping and cracking against the hood and windshield. Thorns scraped along the sides with a high metallic shriek. The clearing was only seconds away now, and through the thrashing vegetation Kofi could already see a third hyena moving in low to the ground, stalking with predatory focus, aiming for the calf's hamstrings, the classic tactic they used on young prey: cripple the legs first, bring it down, then tear it apart alive while it still breathed. The calf had maybe 30 seconds left. Kofi's jeep exploded into the open field in a spray of dirt and torn grass. He grabbed his rifle from the passenger seat in one fluid motion, threw open the door while the vehicle was still moving, and fired into the air. The thunderous blast rolled across the savanna like a physical force, echoing off the distant hills. Birds erupted from nearby trees in panicked clouds. The hyenas jerked backward as one, their heads snapping toward the sound, but they didn't flee. Instead they stopped about 20 meters away, forming a loose semicircle, yowling to one another in their eerie, almost human-sounding calls. Their eyes never left the calf. They'd been hunting. They'd tasted blood. They weren't ready to give up their prize. Kofi jumped out, boots hitting the ground hard, and grabbed the flare gun from its holster on his belt. He aimed low and fired directly at the alpha's front paws. The flare hit the dirt and exploded in a violent burst of red fire and acrid smoke, hissing and spitting sparks in all directions. The alpha yelped and leaped backward, finally breaking formation. Only then did the pack retreat into the tall grass at the clearing's edge, but not far. Kofi could see their dark shapes moving through the yellow stalks, circling, regrouping. Their eyes glinted in the fading light like amber coals that he knew they'd be back. Hyenas always came back. The calf stood in the center of the clearing, his entire body trembling so violently that his ears flapped with each shudder. Blood dripped from his bitten tail, leaving dark spots in the dust. Kofi approached slowly, keeping his movements gentle and deliberate, trying not to add to the animal's terror, but the calf stepped toward him on his own, closed the distance between them, and pressed his small trunk against Kofi's leg. The touch was surprisingly warm. The calf let out a broken whimper, a sound no young creature should ever have to make. He was completely, utterly alone. Kofi knelt and examined the tail wound. Thankfully it was shallow. The hyena hadn't had time to clamp down fully before Kofi arrived. The bleeding was already slowing. But that wasn't what worried him. A mother elephant never abandons her young. The bond is unbreakable. This calf must have wandered too far from the herd, become disoriented, lost the trail, and now the vast savanna had swallowed him whole, leaving him exposed to every predator for miles around. Kofi looked back toward the grass. The hyenas were still there, watching, waiting. Leaving the calf here meant certain death. The pack would return the moment his jeep disappeared over the horizon, and this time they wouldn't hesitate. They'd learned the calf was alone. Vulnerable. Easy prey. Kofi grabbed his radio and pressed the transmit button. Base, this is Kofi. Found a lone calf in the east sector, approximately 2 kilometers from Waterhole 7. No sign of the herd. No sign of the mother. I'm beginning a search. Staying on comms. Static crackled, then the response came through. Copy, Kofi. Be careful out there. Sun's going down in 2 hours. Kofi clipped the radio back to his belt and began searching the ground for tracks. He moved in widening circles around the clearing, eyes scanning for any sign, deep footprints pressed into soft earth, broken branches at shoulder height, piles of fresh dung, stripped bark. 50 meters ahead, near a cluster of fever trees, he spotted them, wide grooves pressed deep into the soil, spaced in the distinctive pattern of elephant feet. A herd had passed through here recently. The grass along the trail was still bent, not yet sprung back. Some of the broken branches showed sap still wet and glistening. Their trail led northwest, toward the rocky hills in the distance. Kofi started forward at a measured pace, following the signs. Behind him, the calf hurried to keep up on his short, unsteady legs, stumbling occasionally but refusing to fall behind. He pressed close to Kofi's side, his trunk occasionally reaching out to touch the man's leg as if to confirm he was still there. The little elephant refused to be left alone again. As they walked, Kofi saw more evidence of the herd's passage: acacia branches stripped of their leaves at varying heights, bark scraped from tree trunks where elephants had scratched themselves, fresh dung piles still steaming slightly in the cooling air, untouched yet by the dung beetles that would normally swarm within minutes. The herd had passed through here less than an hour ago. They were close. 20 minutes of steady tracking brought them to a dry riverbed, its cracked mud surface baking in the late afternoon sun. Kofi started down the embankment, then froze in mid-step. On the far side of the riverbed, spread across a wide expanse of sparse grass and scattered thorn bushes, grazed a herd of buffalo. At least 30 strong, maybe 40. The massive bulls positioned themselves along the perimeter like sentries, their bodies blocky and powerful, their hides dark as wet stone. One bull near the front lifted his enormous head, his curved horns spreading wide like scythes, and stared directly at Kofi and the calf with eyes that showed no fear, only assessment. Cape buffalo. One of the big five. One of the most dangerous animals in Africa. Lions might be called the king of beasts, but buffalo killed more people than lions ever had, goring them, trampling them, hunting down wounded hunters with terrifying intelligence and determination, and the elephant's trail led straight through their territory. The bull snorted, a sound like a blast of steam, and stepped forward with deliberate intent. His massive head lowered slowly until his horns pointed forward like weapons. Behind him, other bulls began to turn, alerted by his movement. The calf pressed hard against Kofi's leg, his whole body trembling again, sensing the danger even if he didn't fully understand it. Kofi knew the rules, he'd learned them the hard way, years ago, watching a colleague make a fatal mistake. Don't run. Running triggers the charge instinct. Don't make direct eye contact. That's a challenge. No sudden movements. No loud noises. Move slowly, predictably, like you're not a threat. He placed one steadying hand on the calf's head, feeling the rough texture of skin and the rapid pulse beneath, and began edging left, inch by careful inch. The bull stomped his front hoof, sending up a puff of dust. Then he made a mock charge, 2 explosive steps forward, head swinging. Each step took an eternity. Sweat ran down his back despite the cooling air. His hand never left the calf's head, keeping the frightened animal grounded, preventing another bolt that would certainly trigger a stampede. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The bulls followed their movement with slow turns of their massive heads but didn't advance. The rest of the herd began to lose interest, returning to their grazing one by one, though the bulls remained alert. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was closer to 15 minutes, Kofi and the calf reached the far edge of the riverbed. The angle now placed them outside the buffalo's immediate defensive zone. Kofi climbed the opposite embankment, the calf scrambling up behind him, small rocks cascading down under his feet. When they reached the top, Kofi exhaled in relief for the first time since spotting the herd. He looked back. The bulls were still watching but hadn't moved from their positions. The message was clear: we'll let you leave, but don't come back. The elephants' tracks continued on the far side, leading toward a stand of ancient baobabs along the hillside, their swollen trunks rising like monuments against the darkening sky. Half an hour later, as the sun touched the horizon and painted the clouds orange and gold, Kofi heard it, the low rumble of elephant vocalization somewhere beyond the trees ahead. The sound traveled through the ground as much as the air, a subsonic vibration he felt in his chest before he consciously heard it. He quickened his pace. The calf squealed with sudden excitement, recognizing the sound, and dashed ahead on his stubby legs, trumpeting with desperate joy. The herd appeared as they rounded a massive baobab. 8 adult females and several young ones, their gray bodies partially hidden in the shadows of the trees. They were feeding, stripping bark and pulling down branches. The calf ran toward them at full speed, his trunk raised high, calling out to them with all the hope and relief a lost child could express. But something went terribly wrong. The nearest cow, a large matriarch with long, ivory-white tusks, turned toward the approaching calf, saw him, and immediately flared her ears wide. Her trunk lifted and she roared a warning, the sound so deep and loud it seemed to shake the ground. The calf froze mid-stride, confusion washing over his small face. Another cow stomped her front foot hard, sending up a cloud of dust. A third swung her trunk in a threatening arc. The calf tried to approach again, calling out with plaintive chirps, but the matriarch charged forward 3 steps and roared again, even louder this time. They were rejecting him. This wasn't his herd. Kofi's heart sank. Elephants identify their family by scent, by sound, by 100 subtle cues humans can barely perceive. This calf smelled like a stranger, sounded like an outsider. To them, he was just another animal, and a potential threat to their own young, a source of disease, a disruption to their carefully maintained social order. Kofi rushed forward, grabbed the confused calf, and pulled him back just as one of the cows lunged. Her tusks sliced through the air so close to Kofi's face that he felt the wind of their passing, smelled the earth and vegetation on her breath. Step by step he retreated with the trembling calf pressed against his side, moving slowly enough not to provoke a full charge but quickly enough to get clear. The calf whimpered softly, unable to understand why the other elephants, creatures like him, his own kind, had pushed him away with such violence. When they were finally safe, 50 meters back along the trail, Kofi stopped and let the calf lean against him. The little elephant was shaking again, his trunk drooping nearly to the ground. They had followed the wrong trail, somewhere else in this vast savanna, stretching hundreds of square kilometers in every direction. The calf's real mother was searching for him, or perhaps unable to search at all. Kofi pulled out his radio to report the situation, but before he could speak, he caught movement in his peripheral vision. 3 hyenas were watching from a distant rise, their silhouettes stark against the orange sky. The same pack. He recognized the alpha by his torn ear, even at this distance. They had been trailing Kofi and the calf the entire time, staying just out of sight, patient as death itself, waiting for darkness to fall and the advantage to shift back in their favor. Every minute counted now. The sun was already half hidden behind the western hills. Kofi turned and ran back the way they'd come, the calf galloping beside him. They reached the fork in the trails within 10 minutes, both breathing hard. Kofi knelt and examined the ground with desperate focus in the fading light. There, another set of tracks he'd missed before, faint and almost invisible, partially obscured by the more obvious trail they'd followed. These tracks were smaller, spaced oddly, showing the gait of an elephant walking slowly, hesitantly. A single female, walking alone. Strange. Adult female elephants almost never separate from their herd. The matriarchal bond is too strong, the safety in numbers too critical. Something had driven this female away from the others. The calf suddenly froze beside Kofi, went absolutely still, and lifted his small trunk into the air. His ears fluttered forward, catching sounds Kofi couldn't hear. Then the calf let out an excited chirp, different from all his other calls, higher and more urgent, and sprinted ahead without warning, following the faint trail at a speed Kofi hadn't seen him manage before. The calf had recognized her scent. Kofi ran after him, his lungs burning, branches whipping at his face. The trail wound through dense bush, then opened into a clearing at the base of a rocky hill. A lone acacia tree stood in the center, its canopy wide and darkly shaded in the dying light. Under the acacia lay a massive elephant cow, her body stretched out on her side, completely motionless. She didn't stir. Not even a twitch of her ear. Not a flick of her tail. The calf screamed, a sound of pure anguish, and ran to her. He pressed his trunk against her face, pushing desperately, trying to lift her massive head. She didn't respond. The calf pushed harder, his small body straining with the effort, calling out to her with escalating panic. Still nothing. Kofi rushed over and dropped to his knees beside the massive cow. He placed both hands against her neck, feeling the thick, leathery skin still warm from the day's heat, and searched for a pulse. His fingers pressed deeper, searching, hoping. Her skin was warm, that was good, but beneath it he felt nothing. No heartbeat. No flutter of blood through veins. Had they come too late? Had the mother died while searching for her lost calf? Kofi pressed harder, moved his hands to a different position, desperate to find any sign of life. The calf continued pushing at his mother's face, whimpering, beginning to understand that something was deeply wrong. Then, slowly, so slowly Kofi almost missed it, the cow lifted her head. Just an inch off the ground, then two. Her eyes opened halfway, cloudy and unfocused. She was alive. Barely. Her breathing was harsh and rattling, each breath seeming to take enormous effort. Her eyes were dull, showing none of the intelligence and awareness that should have been there. This wasn't sleep. This was something far worse. Kofi moved around her massive body, searching for injuries, and then he saw the cause. A massive abscess bulged from her front right leg, just above the knee, swollen grotesquely like a football. The skin stretched so tight it looked translucent, colored a sickly gray yellow that spoke of infection and rot. The flesh around it was hot to the touch, radiating heat like a furnace. The smell hit him a second later, sweet and putrid, the unmistakable stench of necrotic tissue. An infection. Severe, advanced, life-threatening. She must have injured the leg days ago, stepped on something, been bitten, scraped it against a rock. The wound had become infected, festered, turned into this massive pocket of poison. The pain must have been unbearable, making every step agony. She would have fallen behind the herd, unable to keep pace, the matriarchs deciding they couldn't wait, couldn't slow down for one suffering member when the whole group needed to reach water, needed to find food, and when the calf had wandered too far, perhaps distracted by something, perhaps just playing as young animals do. She couldn't follow. Couldn't run after him. Could barely stand that he had been left alone, not by abandonment, not by cruelty, but by his mother's suffering. She had been here the whole time, dying slowly under this tree, unable to call for him, unable to search, only able to wait and hope he would somehow find his way back. Kofi snatched his radio with shaking hands. "Base, this is Kofi. I need the veterinary team now. I'm sending GPS coordinates. Adult cow with a severe abscess on the right front leg, critical condition, advanced infection, possibly septic. Tell Kwesi and Abina to bring a full surgical kit, for antibiotics, sedation equipment. This is urgent. Copy, Kofi." The cow's breathing grew shallower, more labored. Twice Kofi thought she'd stopped breathing entirely, but then she would gasp and continue. The calf never left her side, his trunk resting on her shoulder. In the gathering darkness, Kofi heard rustling in the bush. He grabbed his rifle, turned on his flashlight, and swept the beam across the perimeter. 3 pairs of eyes reflected the light, green and eerie. The hyenas had caught up. They were circling again, drawn by the smell of sickness and death. Kofi fired into the air. The eyes vanished, but he knew they'd stay close, waiting. Finally, after what felt like hours but was closer to 40 minutes, he saw headlights bouncing across the savannah. The veterinary truck came roaring up in a cloud of dust, skidding to a stop beside the acacia. Kwesi and Abina jumped out before the engine fully died, carrying cases of equipment, moving with the practiced urgency of professionals who knew every second mattered. They ran to the cow, dropped beside her, and Kwesi immediately grimaced when he saw the abscess in the beam of his headlamp. "Jesus," he muttered. "How long has she been like this?" "I don't know," Kofi said. "Days, maybe. Maybe a week." Kwesi examined the cow quickly, checking her eyes, her gums, her pulse. "She's in shock. Possibly septic. We need to drain this immediately or the toxins will kill her." "But we need her standing first," Abina added, her voice tight with concern. She pointed at the abscess. "It's on the inner leg. If she's lying down like this, when we drain it all that infected material could flow deeper into the tissue, into the joint. We need gravity working for us, not against us." Kwesi nodded grimly. "We'll give her a light sedative first, just enough to dull the pain but keep her conscious. Then we encourage her to stand. Once she's up, we work fast." Abina prepared a syringe with practiced efficiency, drew the sedative from a vial, and injected it behind the cow's ear into a major blood vessel. They waited, watching for the medication to take effect. After a few minutes, the cow's breathing slowed slightly, became less ragged. The pain lines around her eyes softened just a little. "Now," Kwesi said. Together they began encouraging her to rise, Kwesi pushing against her shoulder, Abina making sharp noises and clapping, both of them using techniques Kofi had seen them employ dozens of times. The cow's eyes cleared slightly, awareness returning. She recognized on some instinctive level that these humans were trying to help. With a tremendous effort that made Kofi's heart ache to watch, the massive elephant struggled to her feet. She swayed dangerously, nearly fell twice, but managed to stay upright. The calf immediately moved to her other side, pressing against her for support, chirping encouragement in his own language. "Hold her steady," Kwesi commanded, already preparing his scalpel. "Kofi, be ready to grab the calf if he panics." Kwesi positioned himself beside the swollen abscess and, after one final steadying breath, made a long, deep incision. Thick gray-yellow pus immediately began pouring out, the flow seemingly endless, pooling on the ground in a spreading stain. The smell was overwhelming, sweet and rotten and chemical all at once. The cow flinched but the sedative held. She didn't try to move away. The calf, however, panicked immediately. He saw the blood mixing with the pus, saw the human cutting his mother, and interpreted it as an attack. He trumpeted in alarm and charged at Kwesi, his small tusks barely visible but his intent clear. Kofi grabbed him, wrapping both arms around the small elephant's torso, holding him back with all his strength. The calf was surprisingly powerful, nearly breaking free twice. "They're helping her," Kofi whispered urgently into the calf's ear, holding tight. "I know it looks bad, but they're helping her. They're saving her life." For nearly an hour they worked under the harsh beams of flashlights and the truck's headlights. Kwesi drained the abscess completely, then began the delicate work of removing dead tissue, necrotic muscle and fascia that had turned gray and lifeless, infected material that could spread the poison further if left inside. Abina assisted, handing him tools, irrigating the wound with antiseptic solution, keeping the area as clean as possible under field conditions. Finally Kwesi placed a drain tube deep inside the wound cavity to allow any remaining infection to escape over the coming days. Abina administered a massive dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics through and 4-line, the medication flowing directly into the cow's bloodstream where it could fight the infection from within. When they finally stepped back, both veterinarians were covered in sweat despite the cool night air. Kwesi looked at Kofi and nodded slowly. "She'll live," he said, his voice carrying the weight of certainty earned through years of experience. "It was close, closer than I'd like. Another couple of days and the infection would have reached her bloodstream systemically. She wouldn't have survived that. But we got here in time. The antibiotics will handle the rest." Slowly, as if waking from a nightmare, the cow's eyes began to clear. The cloudiness receded, replaced by the sharp awareness that should have been there all along. She made a soft rumble, low and resonant, felt as much as heard, and the calf immediately broke free from Kofi's loosened grip and ran to her side, trumpeting with joy so pure it made Kofi's throat tight. The mother wrapped her trunk around her calf, pulling him close, and for a long moment they stood like that in the darkness, reunited, alive, together again. Kofi returned every day for the next 2 weeks. Each morning he would drive out to the acacia tree with fresh bandages, antibiotics, supplies to clean and check the surgical drain. And every morning the calf would hear his jeep coming from half a kilometer away and run to greet him, trumpeting excitedly, pressing his trunk against Kofi's chest like an old friend. Day by day, the mother's strength returned. The pain that had crippled her eased. Her eyes brightened. She began to walk again, first just a few steps, then farther, though with a slight limp that Kwesi said would probably never fully disappear. By the end of the second week, she was foraging normally, stripping bark from the acacia, pulling down branches, eating constantly to rebuild her strength. A month after that terrible day, Kofi drove out for what he knew would be his final visit. The abscess had fully healed, leaving only a pale scar on her leg, a permanent mark of how close she'd come to death. Under the acacia the cow stood tall and strong again, her calf playing nearby, grabbing branches with his trunk and nudging his mother's side playfully, the way healthy young elephants do. When Kofi stepped out of his jeep, the calf ran to him as always, but this time his mother followed. She approached slowly, her massive body moving with renewed grace, and stopped directly in front of Kofi. For a long moment she simply looked at him with those impossibly intelligent eyes, then she rumbled softly, not a warning, not a threat, but something else entirely. A sound Kofi had heard before from elephants whose lives he'd saved. Recognition. Acknowledgement. Gratitude expressed in a language older than words. In the distance, carried on the wind, came the sound of rumbling calls. Kofi turned and saw a herd of elephants appearing on the horizon, 8 adult females and several young ones. The mother's family, returning at last after their long journey, coming back to find the member they'd left behind. The cow lifted her head and answered their call with her own, the sound deep and joyful. The calf looked at Kofi, then at the approaching herd, then back at Kofi. He seemed torn, uncertain. Then he wrapped his trunk around Kofi's arm one final time, holding tight for several heartbeats, and released his grip. Kofi watched as mother and calf walked together toward the approaching herd, the great elephant cow who had survived against impossible odds and her once-lost child who had found his way home through a nightmare. They moved step for step, side by side, their trunks occasionally intertwining. The herd welcomed them with raised trunks and rumbling calls, closing around them protectively. Together, the reunited family turned toward the distant hills where water and food waited. Kofi stood by his jeep, watching until they disappeared into the golden haze of the savanna, becoming silhouettes, then shadows, then nothing but memory and dust on the wind. But he would remember. He would always remember the day a lost calf found his dying mother, and how together, elephant, human, and the raw determination to survive, they had cheated death under an acacia tree in the heart of Africa.